The morning sun peeked through the worn but clean curtains of a modest two-bedroom apartment in Oakland. The gentle rays touched the face of a teenage boy who was already awake, lying in bed, staring at his basketball posters. At 16, he had the kind of energy that made sleeping an impossible, even on weekends. The smell of pancakes drifted through the air, his mom's Saturday morning tradition. She'd been working night shifts at Highland Hospital all week, but she never skipped their weekend ritual. The sound of her humming old soul tunes, mixed with the sizzle of the griddle, brought a smile to his face. "Baby, breakfast is ready," her warm voice called out. She only used that nickname at home, a reminder that no matter how tall he grew, he'd always be her little one. The kitchen was small but full of life, with plants on the windowsill and family photos covering the fridge. His mom stood there in her faded nursing scrubs, hair tied back, flipping the last pancake. "Got another double shift tonight," she said, sliding a plate stacked with golden brown pancakes in front of him. "But I left money for pizza on the counter." Her eyes were tired, but her smile never wavered. She'd been doing this alone since his father passed away 5 years ago, working extra shifts, making sure bills were paid, never missing a parent-teacher conference. Between bites of syrup-soaked pancakes, he told her about his plans for the day, heading to Oakland Hills Park to practice. "Coach says I might make team captain next season if I keep working hard." His mom beamed with pride. They both knew basketball could be his ticket to college, something they couldn't afford otherwise. After breakfast, he grabbed his well-worn basketball, a 16th birthday present his mom had saved up for months to buy. The morning air was crisp, typical for the Bay Area, as he started his familiar walk to the park. The neighborhood was coming alive. Mr. Chen opening his corner store, kids riding bikes on the sidewalk, and the usual Saturday morning bustle. The park sat on a hill overlooking the city, a place where different worlds often collided. Tech workers jogged past families having picnics. Startup entrepreneurs walked their dogs alongside longtime residents. He'd been coming here to practice since he was 12, watching the city change around him as new companies moved in and old neighbors moved out. His favorite court was empty, just how he liked it early in the morning. The backboard was slightly crooked, and the chain net made a satisfying swish with every perfect shot. He started his routine. Layups, free throws, three-pointers. Each bounce of the ball echoed his dreams of a better future, not just for himself, but for his mom too. Little did he know that this ordinary Saturday morning was about to become anything but regular. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, more people began filtering into the park, including a small group that would change his life forever. But for now, he was just a kid with a basketball, chasing his dreams one dribble at a time. The morning practice session was going well. Sweat dripped down his face as he perfected his crossover dribble, the same move he'd been practicing for weeks. The court had always been his sanctuary, a place where nothing mattered except the rhythm of the ball and the sound of it swooshing through the chain net. Taking a water break, he sat on the nearby bench and pulled out his worn water bottle. That's when he noticed them, a small group entering the park from the upper entrance. Something about them seemed different from the usual weekend crowd. 2 men in plain clothes walked with an alertness that seemed out of place, while between them, a young woman in expensive athleisure wear held the hand of a small boy. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, with distinctive features that seemed vaguely familiar. He wore a tiny SpaceX t-shirt and light-up sneakers, bouncing along with the endless energy that all young children seem to possess. The teenager watched as they settled near the playground, the 2 men maintaining a discreet distance while scanning the area. As he returned to his practice, he couldn't shake the feeling that he should know who they were. The Bay Area was full of tech personalities and their families, and he'd grown used to seeing all sorts of people in the park. Still, something about this group tugged at his memory. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the bounce of his basketball as he worked on his jump shot. Occasionally, he'd glance over at the playground, where the little boy was now happily swinging while the young woman, probably his nanny, sat nearby, deeply engaged with something on her phone. Time passed, and more families began arriving at the park. The morning fog had finally burned away, revealing one of those perfect California days that made everyone want to be outside. He was just about to wrap up his practice when he heard the distinctive sound of a ball bouncing away from the playground. Looking up, he saw a small red ball rolling toward the hill's edge. The little boy in the SpaceX shirt was running after it, his light-up shoes flashing with each step. The nanny was still focused on her phone, and the security men had been momentarily distracted by a group of cyclists passing through. That's when it hit him. He recognized the boy from social media posts and news stories. This wasn't just any tech executive's child. This was Elon Musk's son, the one with the unique name that had made headlines around the world. His heart rate quickened as he watched the boy getting dangerously close to the steep hill that dropped off toward the busy street below. The teenager's muscles tensed as he observed the scene unfolding before him. The boy was just a few feet from the hill's edge now, still chasing his bouncing ball with the innocent determination that only a child could have. None of the adults had noticed yet. The nanny was typing something on her phone, and the security team was still dealing with the cyclist's situation. Time seemed to slow down as he realized he was the only one who saw what was about to happen. The ball bounced once more, heading straight for the decline, and the little boy reached out for it, his momentum carrying him forward. In that split second, the teenager had to make a choice that would change both their lives forever. His body moved before his mind could fully process what was happening. The basketball he'd been holding dropped from his hands, bouncing away forgotten as he sprinted across the park. The distance between him and the little boy seemed impossibly long, yet he could see everything with crystal clarity. The child's outstretched fingers reaching for the red ball, his small shoes lighting up with each step toward danger. Time felt strange, like someone had pressed slow motion and fast forward at the same time. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel the rough ground under his running shoes, could see the exact moment when the little boy's foot crossed that invisible line where the safe, flat ground began to slope dangerously downward. "Hey!" he shouted, hoping to get the boy to stop. But the child was too focused on his rolling ball to notice. The nanny's head finally snapped up at the sound of his voice, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. The security men turned too, but they were too far away, still near the park entrance. The teenager's years of basketball training kicked in. All those sprints, all those diving saves for loose balls, as he pushed his body to move faster. He could see the edge getting closer, could hear the traffic below, could feel the surge of adrenaline pushing him forward. The little boy was barely a step away from tumbling down the steep incline. Without thinking about his own safety, he launched himself forward. His right hand grabbed the back of the boy's SpaceX t-shirt, while his left arm wrapped around the child's waist. The momentum sent them both rolling, but he twisted his body to take the impact, protecting the small figure in his arms. They landed hard on the grass, safely away from the edge, his shoulders scraping against the ground as they came to a stop. For a moment, everything was silent except for their heavy breathing. The little boy looked up at him with wide, startled eyes, but didn't cry. Instead, he asked in a small voice, "Did you save me?" The teenager nodded, still catching his breath, his heart racing from both the physical exertion and the realization of what could have happened. The nanny reached them first, her face pale with fear and relief. She scooped up the child, checking him for any injuries while repeatedly thanking the teenager. The security men arrived seconds later, their professional composure slightly shaken. One of them helped the teenager to his feet, while the other spoke urgently into a hidden earpiece. As the adrenaline began to fade, the teenager became aware of the burning sensation on his shoulder and arm where he'd skidded across the ground. His favorite practice shirt was torn, and he could see scrapes underneath, but he barely felt the pain. All he could think about was how close it had been, how a split second's difference could have changed everything. People had gathered around them now, drawn by the commotion. Someone was recording with their phone, but the security team quickly asked them to stop. The little boy was still surprisingly calm, now safely in his nanny's arms, looking at his rescuer with curiosity and something like admiration. One of the security men pulled out a small notebook. "We need to take down your information," he said, his tone professional but grateful. "What you did here today, that was incredible. There are people who will want to know about this." The teenager gave them his details, not really expecting anything to come of it. He was just glad the boy was safe. As they prepared to leave, the little boy waved goodbye with a bright smile, his earlier brush with danger already forgotten in the way that only children can manage. The teenager waved back, unaware that this moment, this split-second decision to help someone in need, was about to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. The walk home felt different somehow. His shoulder stung from the scrapes, and his favorite practice shirt was ruined, but none of that seemed to matter. The sun was high in the sky now, and the morning's events kept replaying in his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. He picked up his basketball from where it had rolled during the rescue, but he hadn't dribbled it once on the way home, too lost in thought about those few crucial seconds that had changed everything. His mom was still sleeping after her night shift when he quietly entered their apartment. In the bathroom, he carefully cleaned the scrapes on his shoulder and arm, wincing slightly at the sting of antiseptic. The mirror reflected back a face he knew well, but something felt different. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, or maybe it was just the weight of what had happened settling in. As he changed his torn shirt, his phone buzzed. The local news had already picked up the story. Someone had managed to capture a short video clip of the aftermath, and it was spreading quickly across social media. There he was, standing next to the security team, his practice shirt torn and dirty. The caption read, "Local teen hero saves child from dangerous fall at Oakland Hills Park." His phone kept buzzing with notifications. Friends from school had started messaging him, sharing links to the news stories. Some of them had already figured out who the child was. Social media was lighting up with speculation about Elon Musk's son being the kid he'd saved. He turned off his notifications, not ready to deal with all the attention. In the kitchen, he made himself a sandwich, his hands slightly shaking as the adrenaline fully wore off. The events kept playing back in his mind. The red ball rolling, the little boy running, that heart-stopping moment when he realized what was about to happen. He couldn't shake the image of what might have happened if he'd been just a second slower. The sound of his mom's bedroom door opening broke through his thoughts. She emerged looking tired from her shift, but her expression quickly changed to concern when she saw him sitting there, quiet and still in the middle of the day instead of practicing basketball. "Baby, what happened to your arm?" she asked, immediately noticing the scrapes. She rushed over, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she examined his injuries. He took a deep breath and started telling her everything. About the morning practice, the little boy, the red ball, and those crucial moments that had seemed to last forever and no time at all. His mom listened intently, her eyes growing wider as he explained who the child was. When he finished, she pulled him into a tight hug, ignoring his wincing shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father would be too." Those words hit him harder than the ground had earlier. They sat together at their small kitchen table, his sandwich forgotten, as his mom pulled out her phone to look at the news stories. Her eyes filled with tears as she watched the clip, seeing her son standing there, disheveled but determined. "You've always had good instincts," she said softly, "always thinking of others first." The afternoon sun streamed through their kitchen window, creating patterns on the worn linoleum floor. Outside, they could hear the usual neighborhood sounds. Kids playing, cars passing, life going on as normal. But inside their small apartment, there was a sense that something big was shifting, like the calm before a storm. Neither of them could have guessed just how much their lives would change when the sun rose the next morning. For now, they sat together in their quiet kitchen, a mother proud of her son, a teenager processing an extraordinary morning, both unaware that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could imagine. By early evening, Their quiet Saturday had transformed into something entirely unexpected. The first news van pulled up outside their apartment building around 4 p.m., followed quickly by two more. Their neighbor from downstairs knocked on their door to let them know that reporters were asking about them in the lobby. His mom peeked through the curtains at the growing media presence below. "Looks like your morning adventure is getting more attention than we thought," she said, letting the curtain fall back into place. She'd called off her evening shift, something she rarely did, sensing that this situation needed her attention more than the hospital did tonight. The teenager's phone had become almost unusable with the constant flood of notifications. Former teachers, distant relatives, and people he barely knew were all trying to reach out. But what caught his attention most was an email from an address ending in @tesla.com. It was brief but formal, asking if they could expect a call from someone representing Elon Musk himself. His mom made them both tea, her solution for any overwhelming situation, and they sat at their small kitchen table discussing what to do. The room felt smaller somehow with the weight of what was happening pressing in from all sides. Through their window, they could see camera flashes occasionally lighting up the darkening sky. "You don't have to talk to any of them if you don't want to," his mom assured him, her nurse's instincts for protection showing through. But there was something else in her voice, a hint of pride mixed with concern about what all this attention might mean for their quiet life. Their discussion was interrupted by a call from his basketball coach, who'd seen the news. "That was some quick thinking you showed today," the coach said, his usual gruff voice softened with pride. "The kind of instincts that make a great team captain." The teenager smiled at that. It felt good to know that even in all this chaos, basketball was still there, still solid and real. Around 7 p.m., his phone rang again. This time, it was the Tesla representative they'd been told to expect. The conversation was brief but significant. They wanted to send someone to meet with them tomorrow morning. Mr. Musk would like to express his gratitude personally, the voice on the phone explained. The teenager looked at his mom, who nodded her approval as she listened to his side of the conversation. As night fell, the news vans finally began to leave, but their phones kept buzzing. Social media was exploding with the story. Someone had dug up his basketball team photo from the school yearbook, and it was being shared alongside headlines about the rescue. His mom ordered pizza, their usual Saturday night tradition suddenly feeling like a lifeline to normality in this surreal situation. They ate together on their worn couch, watching as their story played on the evening news. It felt strange seeing himself described as a local hero on TV. The reporters had gotten some details wrong. They called him a senior when he was just a junior, and somehow they'd confused his basketball position. But the core of the story was there. A quick-thinking teenager had saved a child from what could have been a tragic accident. His mom squeezed his hand as they watched. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "just remember who you are. This attention, these cameras, they don't change the heart that made you run to help that little boy." He nodded, understanding what she meant. In all the excitement and chaos of the day, that moment of pure instinct, running to help someone in need, was the clearest thing in his mind. As they cleaned up the pizza boxes, neither of them could have imagined what would be waiting outside their door when the sun rose the next morning. Something extraordinary was coming, something that would change not just their lives, but the way people would talk about acts of kindness for years to come. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of commotion their quiet neighborhood rarely saw. The teenager was awakened by excited voices outside his window, followed by his mom's urgent call from the living room. "Baby, you need to come see this." There was something in her voice he'd never heard before, a mix of shock and excitement that made him jump out of bed instantly. Still in his basketball shorts and sleek shirt, he rushed to their small living room window. The sight below made him freeze mid-step. There, gleaming in the early morning sun, sat a brand-new Tesla Model Y. The car was a stunning midnight blue, wrapped with an oversized red bow that seemed to glow against the dark paint. A small crowd of neighbors had already gathered, their phones out, capturing the surreal moment. Is that really? His voice trailed off as he pressed his face closer to the window. His mom stood beside him, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching her coffee mug so tight her knuckles had gone white. Through the growing crowd, they could see two professionally dressed people standing next to the car, one holding what looked like a folder of documents. The teenager's phone buzzed. Someone from Tesla was calling. In a daze, he answered. They were invited to come down whenever they were ready. His mom snapped into action, years of preparing for unexpected hospital shifts kicking in. "Go shower quickly," she said, already heading to her room to change out of her pajamas. "This is not a morning to meet people in your sleek clothes." 10 minutes later, they stepped out of their apartment building's front door. The crowd parted respectfully, neighbors they'd known for years smiling and nodding at them. The Tesla representatives stepped forward. A man and woman in crisp business attire, both wearing warm, genuine smiles. "Good morning," the woman said, extending her hand. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Musk and Tesla. What you did yesterday." She paused, her professional demeanor softening. It meant everything to a father and his son. She held out the folder she'd been holding. "This is for you." Inside were the documents for the car. Not a loan agreement, but full ownership papers. The teenager's hands trembled slightly as he looked at them, his mom peering over his shoulder with wide eyes. But there was more. Underneath the vehicle documentation was a handwritten letter on Tesla letterhead. The letter was from Elon Musk himself, written in surprisingly casual handwriting. It spoke of fatherhood, of moments that changed lives, of gratitude that couldn't be measured. But what caught their attention was the final paragraph. An invitation to tour the Tesla factory, and more importantly, a full scholarship offer to study engineering at any university of his choice. His mom's quiet gasp brought him back to the moment. She was crying now, but smiling through her tears. The crowd around them had grown, and someone started clapping. Soon, the whole street seemed to join in, the sound echoing off the old apartment buildings. The Tesla representative held out a key fob. "Would you like to see your new car?" she asked. The teenager looked at his mom, who nodded encouragingly, wiping her eyes. As they walked toward the vehicle, he couldn't help but think about how just yesterday morning he'd been practicing basketball alone, worried about making team captain and figuring out how to afford college. The car's door handles extended automatically as they approached, drawing excited murmurs from the watching crowd. The interior smelled of new leather and possibility. His mom touched the sleek dashboard with trembling fingers, as if making sure it was real. Through the windshield, they could see their neighbors taking photos, children pressing their faces against the windows in awe. But what struck him most wasn't the car's luxury or the scholarship offer. It was the realization that his instinct to help someone, a split-second decision made without thought of reward, had opened a door to a future he barely dared to dream about. As he sat in the driver's seat, his mom beside him still alternating between tears and laughter, he understood that sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest moments of doing what's right. The rest of Sunday unfolded like a dream. News of the Tesla's arrival spread through social media faster than anyone could have imagined. By midday, their street had become an impromptu gathering place for what felt like half of Oakland. People brought food, set up folding chairs, and shared stories as if it were a neighborhood block party. The teenager sat on their apartment building's front steps, watching as children from the neighborhood took turns taking photos next to his new car. His basketball teammates had shown up en masse, their usual playful teasing mixed with genuine awe and excitement. His coach stood off to the side, beaming like a proud father, occasionally reminding everyone that he'd always known this kid was special. Local news crews had returned, but this time, the story was different. It wasn't just about the rescue anymore. It was about what happened after. Reporters interviewed neighbors who spoke about his character, about how he helped elderly residents with their groceries, about his dedication to basketball practice, about his dream of going to college despite the financial challenges. His mom had taken the day off from her upcoming shift, something she never did without weeks of notice. She moved through the crowd graciously, thanking people for coming, but he could see her occasionally wiping away tears when she thought no one was looking. These weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when long-held worries suddenly lift away. Around mid-afternoon, his phone rang again. This time, it was a video call request from an unknown number. When he answered, his heart nearly stopped. On the screen was Elon Musk himself, sitting casually in what looked like a home office, with his son waving enthusiastically in the background. The conversation was brief but warm. Musk thanked him personally, speaking not as a tech billionaire, but as a grateful father. The little boy chimed in too, showing off a drawing he'd made of his basketball hero. The teenager found himself relaxing as they talked, especially when the conversation turned to his interest in engineering. Musk's eyes lit up at that, and before ending the call, he promised to personally give him a tour of the Tesla factory when he came to visit. As evening approached, someone from the neighborhood brought out speakers, and music filled the air. The atmosphere had transformed from a news event into a genuine celebration, not just of the car or the scholarship, but of something bigger. It was a celebration of good things happening to good people, of dreams becoming possible, of a community coming together. His mom's nursing colleagues showed up after their shifts, bringing homemade food and happy tears. They'd all heard stories about her son over the years, about his help around the house since his father passed, about his dedication to school and basketball, about their shared dream of him going to college. Now, watching her accept hugs and congratulations, he realized how many people had been quietly rooting for them all along. A local food truck owner, who remembered the teenager from his morning basketball practices, parked nearby and started giving out free meals. "This is what community looks like," he announced proudly, waving away anyone who tried to pay. Other local businesses joined in. The corner store brought drinks. The bakery sent over boxes of pastries. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the celebration, the teenager found a quiet moment to slip away to their apartment. Standing in his room, looking at the basketball posters on his walls and the college brochures on his desk, ones he'd collected but never thought he could afford, the reality of everything began to sink in. His life had changed dramatically in just 36 hours, but somehow he felt more like himself than ever. Through his window, he could hear the continued celebration below, could see the gleam of his new Tesla under the streetlights, could feel the vibration of music and laughter. But what touched him most was seeing his mom in the middle of it all, finally allowing herself to believe that all her sacrifices, all her extra shifts, all her unwavering faith in him, had been leading to this moment. Monday morning brought a different kind of excitement as the story hit national news. The teenager woke up to find his face on morning shows across the country. Major networks were calling, social media was buzzing, and somehow, his simple act of helping someone had sparked a nationwide conversation about kindness and opportunity. He decided to go to school despite his mom's offer to let him stay home. "Life goes on," he'd said with a small smile, though driving the Tesla to school felt surreal. As he pulled into the student parking lot, he could see phones coming out to record the moment. But what touched him most were the younger students watching from the windows, especially the ones from backgrounds like his. He could see in their eyes that his story was becoming their possibility. His basketball coach had called an impromptu team meeting before classes started. "What happened to you is amazing," the coach said to the gathered players. "But what matters most is why it happened. Character isn't built in big moments. It's built in all the small ones that come before." The team nodded, understanding that their teammates' split-second decision to help hadn't come from nowhere. The school principal asked him to speak at a special assembly. Standing at the podium, looking out at his fellow students, he kept his words simple and honest. "I didn't think about who that kid was," he explained. "I just saw someone who needed help." We all have those moments, maybe not as dramatic, but moments where we can choose to help or walk away. The size of the reward isn't what matters. What matters is being the kind of person who stops to help. During lunch, He checked his phone to find messages from universities across the country. The engineering scholarship offer had sparked interest from top schools, many of them reaching out to share information about their programs. His mom had forwarded him an email from MIT, his dream school that had always seemed out of reach. Now they wanted to arrange a campus visit. But it wasn't all easy. Some online commenters tried to turn his story into something political, trying to use it for their own agendas. His mom helped him navigate this, reminding him that he didn't have to engage with any of it. "Your story is about human kindness," she said during their drive home. "Don't let anyone make it about anything else." After school, a major news network sent a crew to interview them both. They set up in their small living room, the cameras making the space feel even tighter. The interviewer asked about their life, about his father's passing, about his mom's long hours as a nurse. His mom spoke about raising a son alone, about their struggles, about their dreams. When asked about the Tesla and scholarship, tears filled her eyes. "It's not just about the gifts," she said. "It's about someone seeing my son's heart and saying this matters." The most surprising email came from a children's book publisher. They wanted to turn his story into a book about everyday heroism, about how ordinary people can make extraordinary choices. The teenager laughed when he read it. He'd never imagined becoming a character in a story that might inspire other kids. As evening fell, he sat in his new Tesla, parked in their usual spot outside their apartment building. Through the sophisticated glass roof, he watched the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, but for a moment, he just sat there, thinking about how life can change in an instant. A knock on the window startled him. It was his mom, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. She climbed into the passenger seat, handed him a cup, and they sat together in comfortable silence. "You know," she said finally, "your father used to say that life doesn't just happen to us. We happen to life. You proved him right." He smiled, understanding now more than ever what that meant. 3 months had passed since that life-changing weekend, but the ripples continued to spread in unexpected ways. The teenager sat in his Tesla, parked at Oakland Hills Park, looking out at the spot where everything had changed. He still came here to practice basketball, but now he wasn't always alone. Local kids had started gathering to play with him, especially on weekend mornings. Some were drawn by the story they'd seen on TV, others by the sleek car that now sat in the parking lot, but they stayed because of the way he took time to teach them, to encourage them, to share what he'd learned about both basketball and life. His mom had finally been able to reduce her hours at the hospital, taking on a more regular schedule that let her rest more. The scholarship meant their future wasn't hanging by the thread of overtime shifts anymore. She'd started taking classes herself, pursuing the nursing advancement degree she'd always dreamed about but never had time for. The children's book about his story had been published, with simple illustrations that captured that crucial moment of decision. He'd asked that part of the proceeds go to a new scholarship fund for kids from his neighborhood. "Sometimes people just need a chance," he told the publishers, thinking about all the talented friends he knew who had big dreams but limited opportunities. His relationship with Elon Musk's family had evolved in surprising ways. The little boy he'd saved had become something of a pen pal, sending drawings and video messages through their parents. They'd had several playdates, carefully arranged by security teams, but feeling surprisingly normal once they got started. The boy had even come to watch one of his basketball games, cheering loudly from the stands. The Tesla factory tour had been eye-opening. Musk himself had shown him around, explaining the engineering behind the vehicles with genuine enthusiasm. What struck him most wasn't the advanced technology, but the way Musk had listened intently to his ideas and questions, treating him not as a charity case, but as a young mind with potential. His grades in school, already good, had gotten even better. The guarantee of a college education had lifted a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. In physics class, he found himself thinking about the Tesla's electric motors, about the future of transportation, about how engineering could change lives. His teachers noticed the new spark in his eyes, the way he stayed after class to ask deeper questions. Basketball remained his anchor through all the changes. He'd made team captain, just as his coach had predicted. But leadership meant something different to him now. He started organizing study sessions with his teammates, making sure they all kept their grades up. "We lift each other up" became his motto, both on and off the court. The media attention had mostly faded, but the impact hadn't. Other companies had followed Tesla's example, setting up scholarship programs for promising students who showed exceptional character. His story had sparked conversations about opportunity, about recognition of everyday heroism, about the importance of being ready for moments that test who we are. On this particular morning, as he watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of hope, he noticed a young boy practicing alone on the court. The kid's shoes were worn, but his determination was familiar. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his basketball and headed over. "Want some company?" he asked, remembering all the mornings he'd spent here alone, never imagining where one moment of courage would lead. The boy's face lit up with recognition, then pure joy as they started to play. As they practiced layups and jump shots, he shared stories about perseverance, about character, about being ready for life's unexpected moments. He knew now that success wasn't just about the big dramatic gestures. It was about all the small choices that build who we become. Looking out at the city skyline, he could see both where he'd come from and where he was going. His story had changed, but his heart hadn't. He was still the same kid who loved basketball and dreamed big dreams. The only difference was that now he knew, deep in his soul, that sometimes the biggest dreams aren't just dreams at all. They're possibilities waiting for the right moment to become real.